I'm Isaac Lung, one of the board directors of the Hong Kong Jewish Film Festival. Today, we are very excited to have Evgeny Ruman, the director of Golden Voices, to be in our interview. Golden Voices is going to be screened on our online platform as part of the Jewish Film Festival in November. And I'm excited to talk to you. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what Golden Voices is about.
Yes, Golden Voices is a story of two people who are married, husband and wife, and they're also dubbing artists. They've been Soviet dubbing artists for decades, and they're very famous Soviet dubbing artists, famous in their field, of course. And the year is 1990, and the Soviet Union collapses, and hundreds of thousands of Soviet Jews can go now, can immigrate, and so they do. And most of them come to Israel, and two of them are Victor and Raya, our heroes of the movie. They're over 60 years old. They don't have any kids. The only thing they have basically is their profession and their talent, their voice talent. And they come to Israel, a country that doesn't really need it at the time. And they try to find themselves in this new country, in this new life, which is completely different from everything they ever knew.
Great. The film is like very complex and humorous and dark at the same time. Maybe I should begin with asking you about your personal experience. I was just wondering in what ways your own experience and your family experience in emigrating from Belarus reflected in the story you tell in the film.
Well, it's not autobiographical, but it's quite personal, I would say. There's a lot of elements. Me and my co-writer, Ziv Berkovich, who is also the director of photography of the movie, who's also immigrated as a kid with his parents, just like me. There's a lot of elements we borrowed from our parents, grandparents, from the people we saw as a children, were trying to, you know, reinvent themselves basically in order to survive, in order to somehow maintain the family, their life, kids, everything. We looked at it with a little bit sentimental and nostalgic view, I guess, because a lot of years has passed, 30 years has passed since I'm in Israel. And although, immigration is tough, and I think everybody knows it, who immigrated, and also the ones who doesn't can imagine the situation. We took somewhere more light or humorous approach because now the perspective of the time allow us to see certain things in a different light than it was in the real time. And we thought that's a fair way to look at it, not only to present the struggles, but also the absurdities and the comical side of the situation, because eventually these people in reality and also in a film maybe they succeed in some way, maybe not in the way they expected, not in the way they wanted, but they find a path. So it's an optimistic story after all, and therefore a little bit different angle of immigration movies we decided to take.
Right. Yeah, I think like your personal story really kind of inspired you in your film, right? So we go to like Victor and Raya's story. I think I mean, in the film, they continuously seek to adapt to the new life in Israel. They're always looking for a job that would give them stability and value, and they also have to learn Hebrew from scratch, despite a Jewish heritage. In a broader context, you also portray that they fear of the chemical attack that may occur because the film was settled in the first Gulf War. So you beautifully portray that kind of micro story of immigrant couples and link it to broader political context. So I'm just curious to know how you think about people immigrating to a new country and to start a new life, particularly at an old age, which you actually portray in the film. the two protagonists are pretty old, right? And how do you also make sense of Jewish identity in an entirely new place, which is so close, but yet so far?
Well, it was very different for Soviet Jews, at least. The feeling of being a Jew in Soviet Union, and when they arrived to Israel, and suddenly everybody is Jewish, but everybody is very, very different. And they're also very, very different. And suddenly, in a way, they lose their Jewish identity and they became Russians. So it's like vice versa. And I think, but eventually, immigration is also a big chance for people. It's a big chance because you start tabula rasa. So everything that was not only good, but also bad and problematic, you feel you have a chance to change it. It's an opportunity to start a new life and sometimes to get free from the errors of the past you've made. So I think a lot of people they understand that it's not only a difficulty, but also also almost like you have another chance to start a new life, which might and might not be different from the previous. And so somehow it all combines with this, because really Aliyah, which is immigration to Israel, I think it's quite different from immigrating to US or to Germany or to other countries the Soviet Jews went to, because of this expectation of coming to the land of Jews. Because I think people who went to United States or to Germany, their expectations were lower. They knew were coming to a different country, a different culture, and they will have to absorb themselves to it. And I think a lot of people coming to Israel thought they coming home. They coming home because it's the land of the Jews, but we understood it's not like this. Maybe they can call it home, and maybe it's a Jewish country, but they will have to adapt themselves, and sometimes even more than people who went to Germany and to the United States, because Israel is very unique blend of Jewish identity and Middle Eastern country. So it was very, very, very different from the Eastern European communistic Soviet culture these people came from.
Right. From your own personal experience, do you reimagine the Jewish identity differently after you are in, Israel?
Well, I immigrated as a kid, so
Mm.
I'm not sure I had any Jewish identity before I came here. I didn't really understood what it was. I knew we were Jewish. I really didn't understand strongly the meaning of it. I knew for me Jewish was different, I guess. It was different because my grandparents, they talked Yiddish at home sometimes, and I knew it's not a language that's spoken outside on the streets. So I understand, okay, we are somehow different. And my grandfather, who wasn't a religious man, my family wasn't religious in any way, but he brought home matzah every Pesach. And also, I understood it's not something most of the people do. And a lot of small things like that made me understand I'm different, not entirely understanding how and why and what does it mean. So I guess my Jewish identity developed in Israel as I was, a teen, adolescence, a grown up lately. I just understood how complex it is,
Mm.
and it's not just about eating matzah and talking Yiddish, much broader thing. But it came in Israel already.
Right. Yeah, involve everyday life, politics, a lot of different aspects. So we go back to the film. Victor and Raya, they face significant challenges in the marriage, and in the end, the film is a happy ending. So Why was that important in the larger story you were telling?
Well, as I said earlier, I, I had some time perspective on this period of life, and I knew all kind of stories, optimistic, pessimistic, tragic. For me, it was important to choose the optimistic side of it because, mm, first of all, it's also true. Like any other scenario, I would choose, but this one is not less true than the others. And I enjoy happy endings in cinema, I must say. Not always, but when I believe it. And here I thought that's happy ending I believe. So maybe also the audience will believe. And also it tells you, uh, you know, I wanted it to show how how people reinvent themselves. I think this was an important story for me. And I think this is important story regardless of immigration and age and Russians and Jews. It's something very universal that a lot of people struggle with, to leave their past behind and to open a new page. And I wanted to tell a story where it's possible, because I believe it's possible in life as well. Not
Right.
easy, but possible.
Yeah. It's indeed very beautiful in the end. It's really sweet. So that goes to the question. Raya in the film has been complaining to Victor that she has never been recognized as a protagonist, right? Because she was like doing on the film, but her face was never being shown on the cinema. And the story goes to her personal life. Her marital life revolved around quite a boring routine, and she felt that she has never felt once entitled to be a protagonist in her life. So by the end, they finally became the protagonists, where many audiences were watching them kissing in a theater. So you portray very well the psychology of Raya and her struggle. Can you tell us a bit about how you made sense of a character when developing the film?
Yes, well, I imagined Raya as some elements of a story which are common to a lot of women, I guess, especially in that time, in that country, where they obliged to put themselves in the shadow of their husbands or men or generally. And her life somehow she stayed not the main character, not also in her job, but also in her life. And she's she's the tragic character in a way who understands her life, most of her life has passed, and she never was important somehow to no one, and especially not to herself. And this new life, when it comes to Israel and all of the basis of her relationships and life is shaken, she feels that maybe now she has a chance to get free, to be herself, to be someone, to be important, meaningful. So for me, she was in a way maybe the main character. I mean, they're both main characters, but the story, Victor is the one who tries to hold to the past, and she's the one who's pushing to break it, to let it go. So because Victor really had a life where he felt he was someone, and she is, as the years has passed, more and more felt like no one. So they come to Israel in a very different phase of being and feeling themselves, but he's not aware of what situation she is. and she's not even aware, but it's deep inside. And this big thing we're going through gets it out of there, gets it from the inside to the outside. Yes.
Right, cool. I think in some way, like, she almost felt like liberated of being, the host of the phone sex company and having a date with that client in the film, which is like pretty hilarious and also quite liberating, I think, that kind of experience. So my next question is like Fellini. Fellini is like, repeatedly referenced through the movie. So it seems like it's quite a deliberate choice to put Fellini in your film. Can you tell us a little bit about like how Fellini has played a role in Victor and Raya's story and how he has influenced your work as a filmmaker?
Well, first of all, for Victor and Raya, I mean, I had to be faithful to the historical truth here that, in Soviet Union, some of the foreign films were accessible and some less. And Fellini, somehow, or some of his films were more accessible to the Soviet audience. I'm talking about the big directors of the 60s and the 70s. Some were known only by name. You couldn't really get their films. But Fellini, uh, I mean, his films were screened, and there's a story in the film, in Golden Voices, about 8.5, Fellini's film that was a winner of Moscow Film Festival in '63. It's a real story. The film was screened, Fellini was in Moscow. So we decided to take this story, this historical fact, and to put Victor and Raya in it. And I guess for people who saw Fellini's film in Soviet Union, it was really something extraordinary. Their ability to see foreign cinema was limited, and Fellini was really, something very different from the Soviet realism that was, in majority of the movies. This fantastic, crazy world was very different. It's very far away from the Soviet reality, reality and in movies. And for me also, Fellini is this liberation, this fantasy, this free form, something not rigid, not dogmatic, something that, is wild. Just everything that you can imagine can be in a film. I think that's eventually Fellini's films is what about. Doesn't matter where it takes place and how. If it's an imagination, it's out there, you know. And so these two films just combined for me for the admiration, Victor and Raya, especially Victor, I guess. No, maybe both. They have for Fellini and his films. It's something so far away and different from them. It's just, another dimension that this director opened for them. And I myself, I love Fellini, love his films. So it was a pleasure for me, this ability to include this homage to him in my film.
Great. My next question is like, what themes have you been inspiring you to creating? What themes have been inspiring you to create your films, and what are you currently working on?
I sorry, misheard the first part of the question.
What themes have been inspiring you in creating your films, and what are you currently working on?
What themes?
Yeah.
Quite different. I'm not sure I'm too faithful to one or two teams. I find, very different stories fascinating. I also, as a viewer, I love watching different kind of genres and films, and it can be something very art house and something very mainstream, uh, horror or comedy. I'm quite open and liberal in this way as a viewer and as a creator. Um, I would say I always like some kind of element of truth in a story. The truth can be different, doesn't have to be something, documental. It can be something very, very subjective. But I think for me that differs. Good or interesting films from the less interesting ones, where I feel there's some grain of truth in there, and not something that someone just wrote for the public to enjoy. It's important for me to enjoy, but it has to come from some honest place. The creator, it's something you can't really judge. You can't say, oh, this is something, it's my personal experience. And that's also the way I treat stories, my stories. Some stories I feel they stay with me and they go. And then I think maybe this story is really worth telling. And some stories they appear and they go away and they disappear. Maybe they weren't that important after all. And the second, what I'm currently working on now, well, I'm about to direct a TV series. It's about a young man who wants to be a singer, but he has different issues stopping him. His family, his criminal boss, and yes, TV series is different from a movie, much broader range of characters and stories. So it's hard to summarize it really, after all.
Cool. I would totally love to watch it. My last question is like, do you have anything to talk to Hong Kong audiences? The reason I ask that is that I think like migration, the film talk about migration. And in Hong Kong, I mean, there's like a big wave of migration right now. And it has been also the core kind of culture in Hong Kong is a migration city. I know your film is not, not talking about the Asian context, but do you have anything to talk to Hong Kong audiences?
Well, I think I'm especially very curious how they will receive this film because of what you said. Because in one sense, there's some common lines between Hong Kong and Israel and the story of migration. On the other part, I guess it's completely different. It's another culture. So it's very fascinating when films travel to receive reactions from people who are, on one hand, very different culturally, but on the other hand, they can understand the story from their angle. Because the film is, I think it's quite specific. I think it's not a general immigration story. It's very specific. They're Russians, it's Israel, it's 1990. So I just wonder how will we react, because now, because of the coronavirus, I don't have opportunity to travel to see the reactions, unfortunately, in the cinema house. But it's also always very interesting how sometimes people laugh at places that in other countries they don't laugh, and they react emotionally. So, I'm just curious, I guess.
Yeah, we are also very excited to see how Hong Kong audiences would react to your film. And we would totally love to invite you to Hong Kong next time.
I hope.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for doing the interview with us. So we'll
for
keep
showing the movie and
yeah.
talking to me.
We'll keep in touch, and hopefully we'll see you in Hong Kong soon, next year or early.
Keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.